The book of Joshua tells the story of the Israelite conquest of Ethiopia in the 11th century. Following the death of Moses, a young leader named Joshua took the role of leader of the Israelites. From the Nile coast of southeastern Sudan, he led the Hebrews across the Tekesse River, biblical Jordan River, and into Ethiopia. After conquering the country, he expelled the indigenous Canaan population and spread the Hebrews throughout Ethiopia. Joshua's conquest of central and northern Ethiopia, 1000 BC, marked the beginning of the Israelite civilization in Africa. Decades of archaeological studies in Palestine, Israel, has revealed the following about the history of Palestine in the time that the Bible associates with Joshua and the conquest of Canaan. There never was any military conquest of modern-day Palestine, Israel, at the hands of any foreign nation in the 11th century. Neither the Israelites nor any foreign nation conquered Palestine by force in this time, never subdued or drove out the local population, and the claimed destruction of the cities that were captured by Joshua never happened.
Excavations took place already at the beginning of the 20th century, and what was found? Well, according to the biblical chronology, around 1300, 1250 BC, there should be a massive destruction because according to the biblical text and the biblical chronology, Joshua destroyed it.
And they smote all the souls that were therein with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was not any left to breathe, and he burnt Hazor with fire. And all the cities of those kings, and all the kings of them did Joshua take, and smote them with the edge of the sword, and he utterly destroyed them, as Moses the servant of the Lord commanded.
Guess what? No destruction. There is no destruction. So already back in the 20s, Garstang said, there's a problem here, and Kathleen Kenyon went back to dig it, and she found the same problem.
The sites that the Bible claims were conquered and subdued by Joshua were not even inhabited in the late Bronze Age.
There is a destruction from about 1540 BC, but after that the town was for the most part abandoned.
There was some collapse of the cultures in this region, but that collapse was gradual and was not because of the Israelites, but because the entire region east of the Mediterranean collapsed during this period, causing a cultural change in the regions around Palestine as well.
We find that there is a fairly low settlement intensity in the earlier periods. In the Middle Bronze Age, it goes way up, and then it drops way down in the Late Bronze Age. There's almost nothing. And then in the Early Iron Age, the period that we're talking about mostly, it goes way up, once again back to the levels of the Middle Bronze Age. So there's this tremendous spurt of settlement circa 1200, 1150 BCE. And one of the things that scholars have tried to answer is, what is the explanation for this spurt of settlement? This wave of new settlement in the hill country actually represents nomads who always had lived there. And once it was critical for them to establish sedentary settlements because of the collapse of empires all around, then they started building buildings, adopting an old kind of pot, the collared rim jar that they copied from Middle Bronze Age ruins, and they started making pits and terraces, and these are sedentarizing nomads.
The city of David, the most excavated piece of land on earth, did not look like the Bible describes it. There was never any big metropolitan city inhabited by a large group of people. There was actually no material reason to even inhabit the so-called city of David, measured even by the standards of that time.
Because now we can point to the Temple Mount. So it was not a big city, it was not a fabulous golden age, but there was something there.
It looks like this, rolling hills, a chaparral vegetation. It's very dense, very hard to clear. This is a frontier. In antiquity, this is not a great place to live. You come here when you're desperate and you have nowhere else to go.
It is a God-forsaken place, mind you, located on the southern fringe, a few hundred meters away from the desert fringe. Supply of water is not that great. Possibilities of agriculture are not that great. There is no oil around, and not even today. and no big port or something like that, no important highway crossing the Levant and passing in Jerusalem. So why is it there? What's going on?
The city is known to have experienced a sudden increase in population, sometimes during its history. But that population boom was not because of some sudden military conquest, but most likely because of immigrants fleeing the Assyrians to the east.
All of a sudden, Jerusalem grows in a quite amazing way, from about 9 hectares to 60 hectares and more, very densely inhabited. So the population grows from, what can I say, maybe 2,000 to 1,200 or something like that in a very short period of time. And this is the biggest town, the biggest city at that time in the Levant. So one needs to explain what's going on here. How did it happen exactly? Who are these people? Where did they come from? And why Jerusalem became so important? There's good reason to suggest that there was a movement of people from the territory of the northern kingdom, which had been taken over by the Assyrians in 720, 722, 720 BC. So people moved to Judah. Why? We don't exactly understand, whether there was some sort of a connection.
The population of Israel-Palestine is known to have remained Canaanite the entire time, and there is no significant difference between one Canaanite group and another. This is not how the region would have looked if it was subdued by a foreign nation, in this case the Israelites, which would have been distinctly different from the indigenous people and would have brought a foreign culture. There wasn't even any writing system in Palestine, Israel, until the 1st or 2nd century AD, in the Hasmonean period.
And we have almost nothing until the middle of the 4th century, when all of a sudden we have here and there a coin, and then the scribal activity picks up speed again only in the 2nd century under the Hasmoneans.
The total absence of archaeological evidence for the Bible's claim Israelite conquest, subversion, and total takeover of Canaan, and the overwhelming support for the opposite opinion, has led scholars to identifying the conquest narrative in the book of Joshua as pure mythology. Joshua began his military conquest from the plains of modern-day southeastern Sudan, known back then as the eastern coasts of Moab. This is roughly half a century after the death of Ramses, so somewhere in the mid-12th century BC. The Bible doesn't only provide us with a relatively detailed historical record of when the conquest of Canaan took place, but it also has left for us a very accurate geographical blueprint over the area conquered by the Israelites and the exact route that the Hebrews took from the plains of Egypt into the promised land of Ethiopia, known back then as Canaan. Joshua's military strategy was simple. He would take the Hebrews across the Tekesse River, biblical Jordan River, and into the central parts of Ethiopia. After crossing the river, they would advance further into the country and would enter and settle in the highlands of the north. They would fight the local population and drive them out. The starting point of the conquest was in a city called Shittim.
And Joshua rose early in the morning, and they removed from Shittim, and came to Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over.
Shittim is the name of a particular tree, identified by scholars as the acacia tree, which grows abundantly in Africa, and particularly in southeastern Sudan. The Hebrews named the area where this tree grew after the tree, and called it also Shittim. They moved from Shittim in southeastern Sudan and towards the borders of the Tekesse, which is described in the book of Joshua as never going dry, but always running over with water in all 4 seasons.
For Jordan overfloweth all his banks all the time of harvest.
This is true of the Tekesse River, which is a year-round river that never dries up and provides the people of Ethiopia with fresh water all 4 seasons.
በቃ حجز በቃ ተኸደፍ ብጣዕሚ ይጠቕመና በዚ መለና ተደሪኡ እሱ ዝኽእለና.
An interesting detail in chapter 3 in the book of Joshua is that just as the Hebrews were about to cross the Jordan River, the water source that distributed water from the north was cut off so that the Hebrews could cross the river on dry ground. The Bible describes the cut-off source as coming from the city of the plains, or the salt sea.
And as they that bare the ark were come unto Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bare the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, for Jordan overfloweth all his banks all the time of harvest, that the waters which came down from above stood and rose up upon an heap very far from the city Adam, that is beside Zaratan, and those that came down toward the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, failed, and were cut off, and the people passed over right against Jericho.
As explained in a previous episode, the biblical Salt Sea, or Sea of the Plains, was the salty Danakil Desert of Ethiopia, which were once the home of Sodom and Gomorrah, two ancient cities located in the Danakil Desert. This is an indication that the Hebrews crossed the Tekesse at the city of Shuak, at the Tekesse-Adbara joining point. The waters that originated from the east, and which crossed the borders of the Salt Sea in the Danakil Desert, were cut off so that the Hebrews could pass on dry grounds. After crossing the Tekesse, they continued to the central parts of Ethiopia and settled throughout the entire country. They later moved further north to the eastern borders of Sudan, reaching as far north as even the second or third cataract of the Nile. The Israelite conquest of Ethiopia in the 11th century BC marked the beginning of the Israelite civilization in Africa. On our next episode, we will discover the material and archaeological evidence of this civilization